Earlier this week, you would have seen the images of Brian Molefe and Anoj Singh in court. They were arrested for alleged corruption at Transnet. That's after the State Capture Commission, the recommendations by the Zondo Commission, and amid a huge demand for there to be accountability for the people who indulged in corruption during the state capture era. This puts huge pressure on the National Prosecuting Authority. You would have seen the organisation Open Secrets pointing out last week that there's still compromised people. They named Andrew Chauke, who are working for the NPA and making important decisions about who gets prosecuted and who does not. Dr. Jean Reparth is a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute. She's been looking at this. Dr. Reparth, good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. We see these arrests, and we see some progress in cases involving Zandile Gomede. She finally pled last week, or Ace Makashile. How do you assess the National Prosecuting Authority at the moment? Do you believe it's making progress?
Well, certainly it's a different institution from the institution that was inherited in 2019. While it's true that some people suspected of being compromised in senior positions are still there, many are not. And there have been replacements of a number of senior positions, directors of public prosecutions, who've brought new energy and new leadership, greater transparency to the NPA. And this is a very slow process. I'm reminded of the impatience that we had in the late 1990s, just after the transition. And we have that same impatience now, post-2019, to see progress. And unfortunately, progress in institutions such as in the criminal justice system is often very slow. And the responsibility, once a case is actually brought to court, the NPA has responsibility to enroll a case and to proceed from there. Once the case is actually in court, the responsibility then shifts to the judiciary to expedite cases. And I think that's where the pressure should now begin to fall. The judiciary should not be postponing matters for months on end, and should be, there's space for the Chief Justice to make directives in this regard.
Well, I was going to come to that. Zandile Gomede was arrested, former mayor of eThekwini, arrested in 2019, only last week. Now, it's a big case. There are a lot of charges. There are a lot of counts. There are a lot of people, a lot of defendants. Sometimes there have been delays because lawyers have left the case or whatever. But that's 3 years before you haven't even heard witness testimony. Ace Makashile, similar thing, from 2020, still hasn't actually gone to the High Court yet. Why is there such a long delay? And until you get witness testimony, you don't really know what kind of case you're dealing with.
So I think what many of us forget is that this entire period included the lockdown period. And every court had different, the chief of that particular court had different rules about what cases could proceed. And when you look at the data in terms of how many convictions we were able to obtain, specifically in 2020 and 21, there's been something of a collapse because of the restrictions on court operation. What that then leads to is a backlog of cases, which in turn delays all cases, because you're dealing with a backlog as well as the current cases. So it's particularly unfortunate that this time when we would have wanted things to move more rapidly, particularly against state capture cases, fell over the same time period when we had these restrictions on court operation. Having said that, our system is old, it is slow, and there are things. We do have pre-trial conferences now where there's an attempt to sort out issues before the accused pleads and the matter actually starts to begin the actual trial. And most of our delays are before the trial begins. And that is where the judiciary can start to be a little bit more strict and a little bit more, have some directives from the leadership in the judiciary about what kind of postponements are suitable, to make more time available, to prioritize these cases.
It seems to me, and I'm a journalist, so I'm sort of wired this way, if you like, that the only way many people judge the NPA is on two things: the number of convictions that come from the state capture and the number of people who are currently before court. You made what may be an important point, that behind the scenes it takes quite a lot. I mean, we've got to look at the hawks as well before you actually get a case before court. Could it be that there's a lot going on that's actually hidden from view at the moment?
Yeah, so many investigations into matters that were aired in the Zondo Commission, had already commenced with the Hawks or within the investigating directorate and the Hawks working together. The new task force that has been created has improved the cooperation between various entities that are working together on state capture. So I think we can begin to see some momentum. The momentum is starting to build up. There are more arrests, the cases are moving somewhat more rapidly through the system. The backlog is starting to reduce somewhat. We're back to somewhat more normality in our court system. And so I think, but what we really need is one or two big convictions with big sentences. And with those, the NPA can start to offer plea bargains. And people don't like, in South Africa we call them plea and sentence agreements. People often have a visceral resistance to that. But often you can get a very a relatively severe sentence, which at least will bar someone from public office. What's required is a sentence of more than a year in imprisonment, and will at least begin to expedite cases. But if people don't believe they will be convicted and that they will serve a long sentence, then there's no incentive for them to enter into a plea bargain. And so what we have is a situation where until we get some big fish with relatively big sentences happening, we won't see those plea and sentence agreements as being concluded.
You're suggesting that if the two Gupta brothers who are in Dubai suddenly ended up in a South African jail on a plane back, appearing in court, I think people would change the way they view the NPA quite quickly.
Well, yes, that would be one of the things. But I think even then, I think it's not sufficient for them to just be in court. What's needed is a conviction, and what's needed is people to actually enter prison and spend time in prison, and that will begin to shift the idea. Because at the moment, there have been very few convictions. The convictions that have occurred have been for small matters where there's been an alternative of a fine, so imprisonment hasn't resulted. And so there's a feeling of people getting a get-out-of-jail-free card. And that's what we need to avoid. We need to have a properly completed trial with a conviction which will convince other accused people that perhaps they need to enter a plea and sentence agreement in order to reduce the amount of time that they're likely to spend incarcerated.
The NPA does not act alone. We've already mentioned the Hawks, albeit briefly. There's the Special Investigating Unit. There are others. There's a suggestion from the Zondo Commission we need another anti-corruption agency. Do we have not enough agencies? Do we have too many who are all supposed to be tackling the same thing?
Well, we have a number of different entities doing different things. We have the Special Investigating Unit that takes on matters that are particularly referred by the President, but only the National Prosecuting Authority, in terms of our Constitution, can prosecute. So unless we change the Constitution, the prosecution lies with the National Prosecuting Authority. So, we can have many different investigators supporting our prosecutors, but unless our prosecutors are skilled and capacitated and on top of the investigations that they are handed, then we're not going to see the convictions that we need.
Within all of this, and I do want to sort of come back to a person like Andrew Chaka, named so prominently in that Open Secrets report, we all remember, or some of us remember, what was happening during the Zuma era, the people who were appointed to the NPA, what they were able to do in those positions. Some of them deny that, of course. Is it still a problem that some people who were accused of wrongdoing, compromised, I think may have been the word you used, are still there? I can't for the life of me understand why some people are still in their positions after everything that's happened and after the evidence we've seen in public against them.
Well, I think anybody who is an employer or in public service will say that employment law is extremely difficult in South Africa. There's lengthy processes that one has to go to. It's not, you can't just say like Trump, you're fired. It doesn't work like that in South Africa, unfortunately. And so you have to have a disciplinary hearing, you have to have evidence, there has to be a presiding officer. All of these things take time. And unless there is, there are often rumors, unless there is solid evidence and a real reason to dismiss someone, it's often easier to try to encourage them to resign or to be transferred to a position where they have less power. And so it's not at all simple. You can't just fire someone out of the blue. There are processes that need to be followed. And although there's innuendo and there's maybe some sort of evidence, sometimes it's not as straightforward as it is made out to be.
Dr. Jean Reparth.
And to add to that, there have been people who have been moved out of the organization. And we have new DPPs, for example, in KwaZulu-Natal, who brought new energy to the province.
Dr. Jean Reparth, thank you very much indeed. Senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute. Very sober analysis of the situation at the NPA. I really do appreciate it.